gang, I'm Erik Norlander, one of the designers of the super cool UNO Synth Pro, the new real analog synthesizer from your pals over at IK Multimedia. Welcome to Synthesthesia 2021. I swear I was going to say that right. Synthesthesia 2021. All right. The UNO Synth Pro is a 3 oscillator, dual filter, real analog synth. The synthesizer path is completely analog. It starts with 3 variable wave shape discrete analog oscillators, and it goes into a dual filter configuration. That's 2 separate filters, each with their own modes. They can be in series or in parallel, in or out of phase. So between the various filter modes, between the phase relationship, between serial versus parallel, there are 24 different possible filter types available in the UNO Synth Pro. This lets you recreate basically any classic analog synth sound you can imagine, and hopefully some new modern ones as well. There are so many features on the UNO Synth Pro, it's impossible for me to go through them all in the time we have. I encourage you all to go over to ikmultimedia.com, check out the great videos, including some stories of the making of the synth, what the motivation was behind the synth, and all of that. I'm just going to touch on a few features that I find particularly appealing on the UNO Synth Pro, and that I think are unique, especially in the way that they're executed. When I say 3 oscillator analog synth, you go, okay, it's a monophonic synth. Well, yeah, it is. But you may have noticed in the little intro bit that I did, I was playing chords. How in the world did I do that? The UNO Synth Pro has a paraphonic mode. Paraphonic mode, what in the world is that? Some of you know, some of you may not. There's monophonic, where you play one note at a time, and there's polyphonic, where you play multiple notes. Paraphonic is kind of in the middle. How can it be in the middle? You're playing one note or you're playing multiple notes? Come on. Aha. The way paraphonic synthesis works is each key that you press, each note that you send into the synthesizer addresses one oscillator. So I'll play the first note, and that controls oscillator 1. The second note I play addresses oscillator 2. The third note that I play addresses oscillator 3. So I can play chords, right? What makes this different from a true polyphonic synth is we're still going through the single filter path, which on the UNO Synth Pro, of course, is 2 filters, but it is still a monaural path, and that is being controlled by a single filter envelope, a single amplitude envelope, and the 2 LFOs. So that's paraphonic. Let me show you how this works. So on a typical 3 oscillator synth, all right, there aren't that many, but on a typical 3 oscillator synth, you'd start with a single oscillator. And okay, that's a little thin sounding, so let's add a second oscillator slightly detuned to fatten it up and add some animation. Now let's add a third oscillator an octave down. Sounds like an analog synth, right? Okay, cool. If we want to go into the paraphonic mode, which we do by pressing the voice button here, now, instead of all 3 oscillators being stacked together on every note I play, they're going to respond individually to each note that I play. What does that sound like? Well, it sounds something like this. Okay, and that motion you hear in the sound, well, what is that? Obviously, that's not two oscillators detuned, like beating against each other, because it's just one oscillator per note that I play. So what I'm doing is what's called pulse width modulation, and this is where you take a square wave. Can somebody draw this outline as I do this with my fingers? All right, thanks. It modulates the pulse width of the square wave, and that gives you a change in timbre, and that kind of animation resembles the sound of detuned oscillators, but it just keeps them from sounding, just like a static, boring, organ-like pitch. In this case, the pulse width is being modulated by LFO2. So if I go over here to my LFO2, I can change the rate. I can get crazy. Okay, that's a nice musical speed for our pulse width modulation. To further animate our paraphonic timbres, the UNO Synth Pro has a 3-slot digital effects processor with modulation effects, delay effects, and reverb effects taken from the best of the IK catalog, from products like Amplitube, T-Rex, Sample Tank, the new Mixbox, of course. These are parallel effects, so if you are an analog purist and you don't want any digital effects, you just want a pure analog signal path, turn off the digital effects, and your analog synthesis pure path is totally intact. However, if you want to add a little color from state-of-the-art, cutting-edge IK multimedia effects, we've got them here for you. So the first one is the chorus ensemble effect from Syntronic. We developed this especially for synthesizers, and so it's perfectly at home here in the UNO Synth Pro. So let's add in some of our ensemble chorus. All right, we can add in a little bit of delay for dimension. Nice subtle stereo delay, and it's low pass filter to make it sound a little more analog. And then there's reverb. This is a brand new reverb that was developed for Amplitube 5 and also appears in the Mixbox software and here in the UNO Synth Pro. Nice, huh? I always forget to turn the mic off when I'm playing the keyboard. Let me do that. So on this particular sound, we've got the two filters set slightly differently. So we're getting some cool phasing going on between the filters, some subtle pulse width modulation, and of course our nice syntronic ensemble effect. Let's listen to some other sounds. Okay, as you'll see, I was modulating the cutoff frequency of one of the filters using the mod wheel. There is a 16-part modulation matrix in the UNO Synth Pro. The modulation matrix basically lets you route nearly any source to nearly any destination with a variable amount. So you get modular synth style functionality inside an all-in-one unit. That's also how I did the pulse width modulation by the LFO, for example. I routed LFO2 to the wave shape of the oscillators and set the amount, and that's my pulse width modulation. We can also do more drastic things, like in this case, I have the filter envelope modulating the oscillator pitch so that the oscillators rise up an octave. Let's check this out. Cool, huh? Okay, here's the same idea, but instead of like the obvious, over the top octave rise, I'm just doing a subtle pitch scoop on this pad sound. Okay, here's an example of an animated pad sound where I'm using the modulation matrix to just subtly modulate all kinds of things. I'm modulating each filter a little bit differently, modulating the pulse width and pitch, and again with the nice digital effects, just kind of adding a cool syrupy quality on top of all this. With two filters and some reasonably well-voiced uses of resonance peaks, you can create what's called a formant filter. And a formant filter basically simulates the formants of your mouth and makes it sound like a human voice. So here I've created a soft choir sound just using the resonant peaks of the two different filters. And I programmed some sound effects, some special effects, presets, just to demonstrate how far you can go with the modulation matrix and modulating filters, volumes, resonances, just about anything else. All right, that was just for fun. There's so many other deep sections of the synth. I wish I could talk about more. I just want to touch on the oscillators a little bit. I mentioned they're discrete analog oscillators, but we give you a lot of control over them. One of the things that we've added in the UNO Synth Pro is hard sync. Hard sync is where one oscillator's period gets synced to the period of another oscillator. And it sounds the most interesting when the synced oscillator is at a radically different pitch, so that when it's synced to the master oscillator, you get this really kind of metallic, super colorful timbre. It's even more interesting when you modulate the synced oscillator with something like an envelope. So imagine that the pitch of the synced oscillator would normally be sweeping. It's going to try to sweep, but the master oscillator is going to keep syncing it back into its pitch. And it's a familiar sound. You may not have known what it was called or how it's done, but when you hear the sound, I didn't turn off the mic, did I? Okay, let me. All right, here's another kind of sync. This is a sync lead. And that is the beautiful sound of hard sync on an analog synthesizer. In addition to the 3 digital effects, you probably have noticed a little bit of overdrive and distortion in some of these sounds. Aha. This is a real analog overdrive circuit, so it's sort of like the 4th effect on the UNO Synth Pro. Here I've dialed that up quite a bit, and I've detuned, or retuned, I should say, the 3 oscillators to play basically a power chord, so a root, a fifth, and an octave. All right, so guitar players don't get to have all the fun. We can do that too. Um, to wrap it up, I'm just going to play through a few more interesting presets. This first one is a pad sound that's got some nice use of white noise in it, and it is again paraphonic. I'm going to wrap it up just with a simple analog square wave lead. Sometimes you just need a square wave lead. This is the UNO Synth Pro, the super cool, don't forget, super cool real analog synthesizer from IK Multimedia. Thanks for watching.